The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, welcome everybody.
We have an excellent show lined up for you tonight.
But before we get started, I do want to say a big welcome to our newest Facebook followers and TikTok viewers. As we've said before, we do notice, and it means a lot to us. And also, thank you to those of you who have purchased some of our bonus episodes and merch in the last month. We really appreciate your monetary support in a big way. If you haven't checked either of them out yet, we do have 8 pretty cool bonus content episodes for everyone and some cool merch. You can find links to everything at our website, whereourmindswander.com. Okay, now we can get started.
All right then, Beth, why don't you tell all our wonderful listeners where your mind wandered for this episode?
Okay, well, my mind wandered to New York City, but I don't think most people expect there to be a freestanding 2.5-story Georgian-style mansion in Manhattan. But located at 65 Jumel Terrace, right off of West 160th Street and 162nd Street, the white painted brick mansion with 4 Doric columns, 3 chimneys, and a lovely little balcony has been there since 1765. Now known as the Morris-Jumel Mansion, it is one of the most haunted spots in all of New York City. Reflecting true colonial style, the mansion's interior has a main hall that extends down the center of the building and ends at an octagonal salon. There's a parlor, library, and dining room on the first floor. All of the rooms are richly wallpapered, and ornate carpets cover the floors. The woodwork in each room is painted a different color to match the wallpaper, like pale teal blue, a rich dark red, and deep forest green. The kitchen and servants' quarters are in the cellar. The second floor also has a main hall that leads to several bedrooms, each finely decorated with patterned wallpaper and 4-poster beds. The guest rooms are located on the half-story above. According to the comprehensive Morris-Jumel Mansion Museum website, morris-jumel.org, the mansion was built for British Colonel Roger Morris as a summer home on land once belonging to the Lenape people. Morris lived there with his wife and children. His wife, who was rather wealthy due to the family business of selling enslaved individuals, purchased 100 acres that today would cover 159th Street to 174th Street. Colonel Morris was a loyalist, and pre-Revolutionary War days he fought alongside George Washington in the French and Indian War. But by 1776, Morris's loyalist ideas weren't very popular, and he and his family went back to London, basically abandoning their house. The following year, George Washington moved in with his troops during the Battle of Harlem Heights, turning the mansion into a military headquarters of sorts. Washington stayed for 5 weeks, using the octagonal salon as a war office. He was accompanied at all times by his valet, an enslaved man named William Lee. When the Revolutionary War ended, Colonel Morris's wife, Mary, was accused of treason. She, by the way, was only one of 3 women to be accused. As a result, the mansion was taken from her after the legislature's Act of Attainder was enacted. Her cousin, John Jay, actually wrote the act, which must have made for some very interesting family get-togethers. For the next 20 years or so, the mansion was used as a tavern and stagecoach stop, but for the most part, it was left to decay. George Washington brought his wife Martha to his former headquarters in July of 1790, hosting a lavish dinner party for some very notable friends: Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Abigail Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and Eliza Schuyler Hamilton. Washington apparently complained that the once opulent house was, quote, in possession of a common farmer, end quote. 2 decades passed before the mansion was purchased by French wine merchant Stephen Jumel and his American wife Eliza Bowen in 1810. Because Stephen was a foreigner and Eliza came from a humble background, they were never really accepted by New York society. But they had money and spared no expense in renovating the Morris Mansion into how it looks today. The couple, interestingly, were also well associated with Napoleon, and in later years brought several of Napoleon's possessions into the house, like furniture, including a sleigh bed with a swan motif and a pair of gilt heraldic wings. Despite their travels and their wealth, the marriage between Stephen and Eliza was not great. And soon after Stephen's death in 1832, Eliza married someone who was a little notorious, Aaron Burr. For those of you who may not know, Aaron Burr was a former vice president of the United States who infamously killed founding father Alexander Hamilton in a duel. The 2 men just happened to meet for the very first time at the Morris-Jumel mansion. This second marriage was kind of short-lived. Eliza divorced Burr after just 4 months, but she reportedly kept his last name for quite a while because she liked the shock it brought to people's faces when they were introduced to her. By 1841, the Morris-Jumel mansion was no longer considered a summer home. Eliza lived there most of the year, choosing to summer in Saratoga instead. Now, one interesting side note that I found, Eliza's cook during this time was a woman named Anne Northrop, who happened to be the wife of Solomon Northrop, the author of the autobiography 12 Years a Slave. So that's a lot of history for one house, except it continues. When Eliza died, she left the mansion to her sister's children. Well, one of them, anyway. Eliza's niece and nephew spent 17 years in court, battling over ownership of the grand house. And then in 1889, Louis Augustin Le Prince bought the house. You may have heard of Le Prince. He invented the very first motion picture in 1890 while living at the mansion, but then both he and the film mysteriously disappeared. For years, Thomas Edison was credited with inventing moving pictures instead. General Ferdinand Earle bought the house in 1894. He and his family lived there until 1903. Both the general and his wife were major forces in philanthropic societies. Earle's wife spearheaded the campaign to make the home a national landmark. That same year, the city of New York bought the mansion from the Earles for $235,000. They got 2 acres of land out of the deal as well. I'm sure you can already guess that some of the spirits believed to haunt the Morris-Jumel mansion are some of these historical figures. Although it's believed that at least one ghost already haunted the house before Stephen and Eliza Jumel even bought it. The lore is that Eliza negotiated $2,000 off of the selling price because she claimed she'd seen the apparition of a Hessian soldier. Hessian soldiers, by the way, did stay in the house at one time. I think that's hilarious.
It's pretty cool.
That she negotiated money off because she was like, hey, this house is haunted. The curious thing is, since the mansion has become a museum, most of the accounts of seeing Eliza's spirit have come from children. One of the most famous stories happened in the 1960s, when a group of school children arrived a little bit early for their day at the museum. They congregated on the front lawn, only to see a woman in a lovely pale yellow and black tea gown emerge onto the second-story balcony. The teachers and the children were pretty taken aback when she called down to them that her husband was ill and they needed to be quiet. When the museum curator opened the front door a few minutes later, the children couldn't wait to tell her about the odd lady in the dress who had just yelled at them. Confused, the curator insisted that she was the only one there. During their tour of the house, the children entered a room with a mannequin wearing a red wig and a yellow and black dress that once belonged to Eliza. The children insisted that that's who they'd seen on the balcony. Other times, a woman in a white dress, presumably also Eliza, has been seen wandering the grounds. Over the years, hundreds, if not thousands, of school groups have toured the mansion, and on several occasions, very young children, some as young as 5 or 6, will refuse to walk down the main hall because, as they put it, quote, something bad is down there. Adults, not children, seem to have had encounters with the other spirits in the house, including the Hessian soldier that Eliza claimed she saw for herself. According to an article in Latham's Quarterly, staff keep a log of their encounters called the Book of Haunts. In it, they've recounted tales of hearing heavy footsteps overhead when they know they're alone, lights going on and off in empty rooms, and doors opening and shutting.
Now, I like that idea that they keep a log.
And that they call it the Book of Haunts.
Yes, excellent name.
They've heard female laughter coming from the empty kitchen area and what sounded like a table scraping across the floor. When staff went to investigate, the 6-foot-long wooden table was indeed off-center from where it usually stood. But 2 of the spirits seen in the house may very well be 2 of the most famous men to have lived in the house, George Washington and Aaron Burr. Washington allegedly paces the floor in his heavy boots, and Burr allegedly approaches people from behind. When they get that overwhelming sense that someone is behind them and they turn around, they find themselves totally alone. Now, there is some speculation that neither Washington nor Burr are actually there, that these 2 apparitions are actually the same spirit, and it could be a Revolutionary War soldier. According to hauntedhouses.com, 2 teachers on separate occasions came face to face with a Revolutionary soldier on the main staircase. One teacher was so surprised, he actually fainted. But if it is Burr, then he is one of the busiest spirits ever, since his ghost is said to haunt his former carriage house on Barrow Street, too. The former carriage house is the famous romantic New York City restaurant, One If by Land, Two If by Sea. He's also said to peer around corners and stare at people in the Aaron Burr House, a bed and breakfast in Pennsylvania. He apparently fled to this house right after he shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. If the spirit there likes to lurk around and stare at people, it does sound eerily similar to the feelings people have in the Morris-Jumel mansion. I mean, he could be hanging around the Morris-Jumel mansion. I just think it's interesting that he's spotted in so many different places. The fourth apparition is said to be that of a servant girl. She could be who the staff has heard laughing down in the kitchen, but more often she's seen on the second floor, according to hauntedhouses.com, and she always appears incredibly distressed. There's the lore that she hung herself over unrequited love, but I didn't find any documentation or a specific name tied to the servant girl apparition. The fifth and final spirit tends to stay in the cellar, which is strange since many people believe it's Stephen Jumel. There have been reports of the disembodied voices of two men arguing in the cellar. One could be Jumel, and the other, some speculate, could be husband number 2, Aaron Burr. Others speculate that Jumel might stick to the cellar because he wants to avoid Eliza, who he didn't always get along with. Paranormal investigators have recorded EVPs in which a male voice complains about his wife. Note to you who's giving me that grin across the table.
Well, can you imagine? You pass over and you're stuck still complaining about your wife.
Well, she reigns the house upstairs, so maybe he does hide down in the cellar to avoid her. That's terrible, though.
He needs to go somewhere else then.
I wouldn't make you hide in the cellar, but I'm going to tell you now, if you leave EVPs in the future complaining about me, I'm not going to be very happy with you.
What are you going to do about it?
I'm going to haunt you right back.
Nice. Well, we'll see.
Regardless of whether the Morris-Jumel mansion is haunted or not, it is a working museum that celebrates the house's rich history. The interior is filled with ornate and priceless artifacts and furniture from the 1700s onward. But if you do want to possibly see some ghosts, the museum does offer 3 different ghost tours. One is a candlelight tour through the mansion. One is a full-on paranormal investigation that allows you to try out all kinds of equipment. And a third option is to book the mansion for a private investigation. Just don't be too loud or Eliza might scold you and tell you to be quiet. Hey, did you know? Maria Brañas Morera was born on March 4th, 1907 in San Francisco to Spanish immigrants. As a child, she moved with her family to Texas and then New Orleans, Louisiana, before the family returned to Spain in 1915. Due to the threat of German ships patrolling the Atlantic Ocean during World War I, the ship her family was on had to reroute via Cuba and the Azores to make it to Spain safely. Maria didn't survive the passage unscathed. While playing with her brothers, she fell from the upper deck to the lower one, resulting in permanent hearing loss in one ear. She also lost her father to tuberculosis during the voyage. In the 1990s, Maria traveled to Egypt, Italy, the Netherlands, and England, and taught herself to sew and play the piano, which she still played up until 8 years ago. In March of 2020, Maria survived COVID. Why am I telling you this? Because I'm betting you didn't do the math. Maria is currently the oldest living human on Earth. She's alive and well at the age of 116 years. Her 117th birthday is less than a month away. Who'da thunk it? All right, it's your turn. Where did your mind wander this week?
Well, recently I showed you a Facebook post by Paul Bartholomew, who is a local author and cryptozoologist. And in his post, Mr. Bartholomew was speculating about the January 28, 2019 discovery of a missing 3-year-old boy. And of course, what did you do? You hopped online and you found the story.
Well, of course I did.
And I got to say that I had never heard about this encounter before. And I'm willing to bet that you're going to find it as intriguing and as fascinating as I do. According to a USA Today article, 3-year-old Casey Hathaway had been playing in his grandmother's backyard with 2 of his friends in Ernle, North Carolina, on Tuesday, January 26, 2019, when he disappeared. For 2 days, FBI agents, local police, and groups of volunteers searched for the little boy in 20-degree rainy weather. Casey was found by volunteer rescuers on January 28th, and he was found a quarter mile from his grandmother's house, somewhere between 30 and 40 yards into the woods, tangled in thorn bushes. The rescuers waded through waist-high water in order to get him, and other than being wet and cold and a little scratched up, Casey was totally fine. Now, the reason Bartholomew mentioned the case in his Facebook post was because, as a Bigfoot researcher, he was intrigued by something Casey told his mother and grandmother, that while he was missing, he was taken care of by a bear. Now, Casey's mother and grandmother did not say that this bear was an actual bear or it was an imaginary one. Casey's grandmother alluded to it as being a guardian angel of sorts. And the police involved in the case said that bears are common in the area, but that the little boy's claims were highly unlikely. But Mr. Bartholomew, like other Bigfoot researchers, was wondering, could the bear have been an actual Bigfoot? Now, before you dismiss this idea, consider this. For the last several decades, especially during the late 1980s, there were a handful of news stories about toddlers and young children falling into gorilla enclosures at zoos around the world. Now, most of these stories contain video footage of something pretty damn amazing. At least one gorilla in the enclosure had come over to the injured child and protected them and gently stroked the injured child's back. Some have even carefully lifted the unconscious child and lovingly cradled it in their arms until human rescuers were able to come and take the child from them. So that got me thinking, if gorillas are capable of it, why not Bigfoot? So, with that said, we have to thank Mr. Bartholomew, because it was his post that got us searching, and that sent my wife down the rabbit hole. Because in his post, Mr. Bartholomew mentioned a man by the name of Albert Ostman. Now, we had never heard of Albert Ostman before, but just that brief mention was more than enough for us to say, now there's a story. Because Albert Ostman claimed that he had been kidnapped by a Bigfoot and held captive by a Bigfoot family for several days in 1924. Albert Ostman, who was born in Sweden in 1891, worked as a construction worker and logger throughout his life. Wanting a vacation in the summer of 1924, he decided to try his luck at gold mining near the Toba Inlet of British Columbia, Canada. According to the BFRO website, which we highly recommended before and have used in our other episodes, Ostman took a steamship to Lund, British Columbia. From there, he hired a native guide to take him to a good gold hunting spot. The First People guide regaled Ostman with stories about a lucky prospector who always had his pockets full of gold, until a Sasquatch killed him. Ostman claimed that he had never heard of a Sasquatch before, and he had to ask the guide what the word meant. He laughed at the stories that his guide told him. It was around 4 p.m. when the 2 gentlemen arrived at the Toba Inlet, and Ostman set up a comfortable little camp at the mouth of a creek. He made supper for the guide, and after they finished their meal, he told the man to come back for him in 3 weeks. On the first day, Ostman looked for old prospector trails and visited the general store for more supplies. He was well armed with several different knives and a Winchester rifle, and he felt pretty secure that first night in his camp. The following morning, he broke down camp and began hiking through the woods, looking for possible gold-digging sites. He did this for about 5 days, moving from place to place. On the 5th day, he decided to camp near a rock wall that was also sheltered by some cypress trees. He made himself a cooking hearth with some flat stones, and he shot a grouse for his dinner, but he decided it was way too late, and he was too tired to cook it that night. The following morning, Ostman noticed something had come into his camp. He suspected that it was a porcupine, and that night he slept with his rifle nearby. Now he believed that porcupines like to gnaw on leather, so he stuck his shoes inside of his sleeping bag. He also strung up his food pack in a tree just in case bears were around. He slept soundly that night, just like he had the previous night. But this morning when he woke up, he discovered that his entire pack was hanging upside down and was completely empty. There were other things missing as well, a half-pound of prunes and the flour that he had hoped to use for pancakes. Now the strange thing is that there weren't any animal tracks anywhere around. Now Ostman kept what happened next a complete secret for over 30 years, until he felt that Bigfoot encounters were being taken a little more seriously. It was 1958 when he spoke to a packed house in Fort Langley about his incredible Bigfoot encounter. According to a March 26, 1958 article in the Chilliwack Press, Ostman, who was now 65 years old, had put up with the supply-stealing bandits for 3 nights. He decided on the 4th night that he was going to catch the animals in the act once and for all. He stuffed his boots into the bottom of his sleeping bag, climbed in, and placed his axe within hand's reach. Hugging his rifle, he was determined to stay awake, but at some point, he drifted off. Ostman claimed that the next thing he knew, he was sliding down a rock slide until he woke up completely and realized that it wasn't a rock slide at all. Something had scooped him up, still in his sleeping bag, and was carrying him like groceries in a sack, deeper and deeper into the woods. He was literally sitting up in his sleeping bag, and he thought about trying to escape, but his knife was lodged underneath him and he couldn't get to it. He estimated from what he could see out of the top of his sleeping bag that it was around 4 a.m.
You know what I find so amusing about that is first it sounds like a Looney Tunes cartoon to me, that he's just like, woof, scooped right up. But you would think that whatever it was, I'm assuming, well, you said it was a Bigfoot, that it would have thrown it over thrown him over its shoulder, not carried him like a sack of groceries. You know?
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
It was unbearably hot inside the sleeping bag, and the only air he could get was through a tiny opening at the top. Eventually, around 3 hours later, he was abruptly dropped to the ground in what appeared to be a 20-acre valley. The valley's east wall was very steep, and the west wall wasn't much better. The only exit out of the valley was a narrow V-shaped pathway carved out of the rock. Ostman's legs were numb from the long journey, and he had to crawl out of the bag. The whole scenario seemed baffling enough, but then Ostman got a good look at what carried him off in the middle of the night. An 8-foot-tall, 700 to 800-pound bipedal creature covered in shaggy hair, and the hair was approximately 4 to 6 inches long. In fact, Ostman said that the only parts of the creature that weren't covered in hair were around its eyes, the palms of its hands, and the soles of its feet, which he said resembled dog's pads. Its arms and legs seemed way too long to be in proportion with the rest of its body, and its hands seemed permanently cupped into a bowl shape. Its fingernails were flat. Describing the creature's face, Ostman said that its nose was rather flat as well, and its cheeks were rather large. Its forehead was sloped back sharply. Ostman began calling the creature the Old Man because, incredibly enough, he needed to distinguish this Bigfoot creature from the other 3 that were right there in front of him. According to Exemplar.com, Ostman said they looked like a family, an old man, an old lady, and 2 young ones, possibly a boy and a girl. The boy and the girl seemed to be scared of me. The old lady didn't seem too pleased about what the old man dragged home. But the old man was waving his arms, and it seemed as though he was telling them what he had in mind. As the Bigfoot family chattered at each other in a language Ostman didn't recognize, he tried speaking to them, but he was pretty much ignored. He was a bit surprised to discover that he wasn't the only thing the old man had carried off. The creature had also managed to bring his 1 full pack. Miraculously, again, according to the BFRO website, all of Ostman's canned food was still in the pack, including coffee and cans of milk. But he didn't have any matches, and most of his bullets were missing. As he tried to take stock of what he had, the younger male Bigfoot watched him curiously. Later, when Ostman rolled his empty snuff can towards the younger male, the Bigfoot jumped back like it scared him. But after his initial fright, he picked it up and showed it to his sister and spent part of the day playing with it. Ostman also described their bedding area. He said it was under a rock overhang and the ground was covered in moss. But strangely, they also seemed to have blankets. Well, blankets made out of woven bark and more moss, but they certainly looked like blankets to Ostman. The Bigfoot family of 4 ate mostly forest nuts and the game that they caught, like wild goat. At one point, Ostman even made a water dipper out of an empty milk can and a tree branch. When he showed the younger male Bigfoot how it worked, the creature indicated through hand gestures and grunts that he wanted a second one for his sister. Ostman claimed that the Bigfoot, which he thought must be between 11 years old and 18 years old, even smiled at him. When the young Bigfoot shared some of the sweetgrass with Ostman, the prospector offered the creature a pinch of snuff, which the Bigfoot licked and then brought over to the old man. Now, this all seems almost too easy, that this family of Bigfoot kidnapped this human man just so he could become part of their family. The truth is that Ostman did try to escape the very first day, but the old man blocked his path, and Ostman was afraid to shoot him, reckoning that a shot from his Winchester rifle would only make the old man mad. Plus, he only had 6 bullets left. The snuff was really a ploy. Ostman was hoping that the old man would take interest in it and ingest way too much at once, which Ostman hoped would kill him. He figured if the old man was dead, well, then he'd be able to outrun the siblings. As for the mother Bigfoot, well, she was more shy and went out foraging, so Ostman didn't see much of her. He said that she was about 7 feet tall and between 500 to 600 pounds. Her hair was longer than the old man's, and she had bangs almost, across her forehead. He also said she could use a good brassiere. Jesus.
I bet she could.
Well, it's too bad he wouldn't have bought one at the general store.
Well, you would think if they were weaving blankets that she could have woven an over-the-shoulder boulder holder.
Perhaps so. A few days into his captivity, Ostman managed to gather enough brush to make a small fire, so he could heat up some coffee. It was at that moment that the old man grabbed a full box of snuff, dumped it entirely into his mouth, swallowed it all, and then licked the inside of the box. Within seconds, he was squirming on the ground, his eyes rolling back in his head. The mother Bigfoot let out a horrible squeal, and the 2 siblings rushed to their father's aid. Ostman saw this as his moment, and he grabbed his pack and took off running as fast as he could. Later on, when he was asked why he decided to leave the Bigfoot family, he gave 2 reasons. 1, he was almost out of food, and 2, he thought perhaps they planned to use him as a mate for the Bigfoot daughter.
Oh, geez. Well, that's a good reason to hightail it out of there.
Yeah. I mean, Could have been interesting.
She probably would have.
We're not going to go there.
Yeah.
But anyway, as he ran as fast as he could, the mother Bigfoot pursued him. He was able to get off one shot, which ricocheted off a rock above her head. Terrified, she stopped in her tracks and then ran back towards her mate. Ostman kept moving for hours until he felt it was safe to camp. Within a few days, he was able to locate a road and was picked up by travelers. When they asked what the heck had happened to him, he simply said that he was a prospector who had gotten lost in the woods. He didn't say that he had been held captive by a Bigfoot family for 6 days. In fact, Ostman didn't say anything about his unbelievable encounter until 1957, when he finally came forward and shared his tale. According to Exemplar.com, he did later say that he briefly entertained the idea of somehow bringing the young female back to civilization with him, but he decided against it, saying, "What good would that have been? I would have to keep her in a cage for public display. I don't think we have any right to force our way of life onto other people, and I don't think they would like it. The noise and the racket in the modern city, they would not like that any more than I do."
Oh. He's probably right.
More than likely. Albert Ostman died in Fort Langley, British Columbia, in January of 1975 at the ripe old age of 83. And although later on he did recant some aspects of his story, like, for example, he later said that he didn't try to use the younger male Bigfoot to trick the old man to trying the snuff, his details about the Bigfoot family were pretty incredible, since he shared details that no one had ever heard before. These details have been corroborated by other people's Bigfoot encounters that happened after this. So when you think about it, so many of his details, like the nest-like bed, the chatter of their language, the sloping of their foreheads, all of these details have been synonymous with more modern-day sightings. And if Albert Ostman really did spend 6 days with the Bigfoot family, couldn't it also be possible that small children have been cared for in the woods by a Bigfoot when they are lost?
It's possible.
Anything's possible. Yeah. So what do you think? Did a bear actually keep 3-year-old Casey safe? Now, to me, from my experience, a 3-year-old boy would know what a bear looks like, especially if they watch cartoons or even saw them in picture books. Is it possible that a Bigfoot cared for the boy? Now, the thing about that is, I would love to know what his parents thought. I mean, did they ever show him any pictures of Bigfoot after that?
Yeah, I don't know. But if it was a Bigfoot, but all he had ever seen were pictures of bears.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm...
correlate the two, yes.
Right, which is what I'm thinking that Paul Bartholomew was thinking. I mean, I'm just speculating. But he named the thing that was most closely resembling what cared for him.
Well, either way, I find it truly incredible. I mean, I would love to know.
It's all the way around, it's a fascinating story.
That it is.
Held captive by a family of Bigfoots.
So, was it a bear? Or Bigfoot? Maybe it's improbable, but it isn't impossible.
I'm so glad we found that story.
I know. And I'm going to reach out to Mr. Bartholomew and thank him.
Yeah. Why not?
He's on my friends list.
You name dropper, you.
Well, we saw him at the Sasquatch Festival.
Yeah, the Whitehall Sasquatch Festival.
An amazing guy.
Yeah.
Very personable, down to earth. Yeah.
All right, everybody. As always, if you would like to know more, you can always check our sources in our show notes for more information. And if you ever want to know anything about Bigfoot sightings all across the country, the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization,
it's amazing
website, it's a database and it's incredible. That
it is. We saw a lot more on it than we thought for sightings around here.
Yeah.
Nearby.
Yeah, and it's by county, like it goes by state, and then you can narrow it down to county, and then you can read. Some of them go as far back as the 1800s.
Yeah, who knows what's lurking in your backyard?
You never know.
But if you do decide to go camping, just in case, pack a brassiere. Might make a good offering.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yeah, that's a very good idea.
Well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.